Hello, everyone, and welcome to the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast. I'm trying to make these intros a little less creepy, but I don't know how I'm doing until I listen back to this. So, hello, everyone. It's now October, the year 2020, and we are getting ready for a relatively quiet October compared to what we're used to. Is that right? Would you agree, Chris?
Yeah, definitely. Probably the quietest October
So most of the events
ever.
That we would normally do around this sort of time we've cancelled because of COVID, or didn't decide to go ahead with. So it means that we're only really doing one-on-one client work, no real public rituals and public events and things like that. So we've had a request come in basically to talk about necromancy, necromantic rites, working with ancestors, working with the dead, that kind of thing, because I do believe the person in question, whose name I won't name because I don't know if they want to be named publicly, but they watched our, I think it was the Ancestral Altar commentary video we did.
Oh, the one that we did for Gloucester.
So that was on. Yeah, we did it for Gloucester Psychic Fair. And yeah, I suppose we'll talk about that because it is October and all that kind of thing. So, do you work with ancestors? And how are you defining ancestors if you do or don't? So I suppose really the question is, people talk about ancestral magic and ancestral veneration and working with the ancestors. What would you class an ancestor to be and not to be? Because we should probably start there so we're all on the same page.
I guess so. Well, I suppose it really depends. Most people think of ancestors as kind of family bloodline, don't they? They tend to focus more so on that as opposed to kind of ancestral leanings of a particular area, or if you were to go and visit the ancestors of a particular place like Stanton Drew or Stonehenge or whatever, a burial ground where there are ancestors there that aren't necessarily yours. Then I suppose we're all connected to Adam, aren't we?
Oh, Adam and Eve. If you believe that, sure.
No, not at all. But you know what I mean. That kind of, we have less and less people the further back you go. So therefore, there's going to be more and more interconnections between people, isn't there? So I suppose to a certain extent, depending on how far you're going back, they're going to be more and more kind of common ancestors, aren't there?
Yeah, so it's more of a complicated question than I think people realize or people would normally say. So most people are in the camp of ancestors are those blood relatives of yours from the past. Other people will say, well, ancestors are spirits of the dead that are related to you in some way and have a connection to you. So it's always dead people that most people are really talking about. Some and very few of them will think of ancestors as those who haven't yet come. So my sister's children's children that they haven't materialized yet. Some people would consider those as ancestors. In terms of common ground and stuff like that, if you're going by blood, that's fairly easy because you're talking about it from looking at time in a linear format, going all the way back to the earliest humans and then whatever came before humans, and maybe some kind of what are they called? I always forget the name.
Oh, you mean Neanderthals and Homo erectus and all that stuff?
That kind of thing. Whether they, if there's some of their blood in with you, and I don't know, your great times a million, 100,000 billion grandmother had sex with a Neanderthal. which explain a lot in certain cases. But what about other things? So would you say that your ancestors are anything that's grown up on this planet?
Yeah, to a certain extent, that's kind of where I would probably stretch ancestors to. There is the other option, but we can get there in a bit. With that, I guess we're talking more about visiting not necessarily your ancestors, but the ancestors. So if you've got kind of a local cemetery, you could have a relationship with that as a whole, or like I say, Stanton Drew or somewhere like that where there are long barrows and all that kind of stuff, where you could go and speak to a specific group of ancestors that aren't necessarily the ancestors of your bloodline, but might be the ancestors of your practice. If you're following a particular type of necromantic kind of ancestral work, then you have the option there to go and explore a particular spiritual line or a magical line in a different way. You know how I feel about it. I have very little to do with my bloodline in that way, mainly because it's been a long time since I was here last. So that kind of raw connection of kind of bouncing through reincarnation kind of makes people probably want to explore their bloodline in the thought of, oh well, twin flames theory and all that kind of stuff, where you're talking about coming back in similar circles each time you come back as soulmates. Therefore, you're expecting that to potentially have appeared in your previous bloodline before yourself, or as you said, further down the ancestral route if you're going forward in time. But I don't know whether or not I would be particularly interested in that. But I don't know. What about you and your bloodline?
Well, there's two real points that I'd pick up from what you've said. One is that the reason why you would want to work with ancestors, compare that to the reason why most people would want to work with ancestors. And from what I can see, most of the people that go into ancestral work as a beginner think of it of one of two ways. They're either trying to look into the past, and some of them have a romanticized view of the fact that all of these people in the past can teach them something that no one else currently alive can teach them. So it goes back to the kind of ancient aliens of Egypt and how advanced there were and of knowledge lost, that kind of thing. And the second thing is that they think that, well, if I focus on some spirit that I've got a link to in some way, then that's more likely to be trustworthy. So you're trying to compile and assemble a magical team of spirits, then they think that the safest way of doing it would be to use, ancestors and explore there, which I think is a fairly safe. I mean, when it comes to working with dead people, it's quite a safe process. I find the vast majority of the time they're quite easy to get rid of.
But I guess it is what it is. It's that we're so ingrained with the scientific method, aren't we? So they want, if you're following your bloodline, then you're comparing that to something you could check by birth and death records about what they tell you or whatever. And I guess some people kind of compare that to having an ancestry.com account rather than actually really doing any magical practice with the previous groups, I guess. I don't know.
Well, working with the dead is normally the first port of call for most people who are interested in learning and exploring magic because of paranormal investigation.
Where I was going.
And TV shows. Yeah, TV shows like Most Haunted and Ghost Adventures and all that kind of thing. Now, you did make another point, which I'm not going to let you escape from, simply because, as you know, I like to play devil's advocate and as you say, I like to set you up so that the podcast listeners can laugh at us. And you talked about obviously sharing lineage, and so you've got the modern day neo-pagan working with the spirits of Stanton Giroux or Stonehenge, assuming you can get close to Stonehenge, that kind of thing, working with someone or something that they don't really have much of a connection with, but there should be a connection at some point. At the very weakest, you're in the same planet as them. So where does that fit in when it comes to cultural misappropriation? Because you can see where this is going now. Because if you're saying that, oh, okay, it's fine to do that. So you're saying that all of these people which don't like us selling dream catchers or don't want us trying to work the Egyptian mysteries or messing around with some Native American stuff, you're saying that, oh, none of that matters because we all go back to a certain extent. Where do you fall on that?
Okay, yeah, typical.
Because people will attack you for whatever answer you give.
Because you love to set me up, and you know full well I'll tell you what I think. So yeah, it's one of those difficult ones in the sense that people tend to focus, and there's a lot of it in the kind of heathenry groups and the kind of, for lack of a better word, Celtic reconstructionists. So if I keep it to Europeans rather than handling the Native American one to begin with. So you have the part of there is potential there because there will be a shared understanding. People will focus on things like language. Now, language isn't necessarily a problem in the sense of depending on what you're using them for, because at the end of the day, you're using the states in which you are going to go into in order to do this kind of work. There is a melding that will go on with a spiritual history, with ancestral work, that will allow you to have an understanding, a shared understanding from the kind of practical point of view. It may take longer because they don't share a common language, but even if you did share a common language, French in 2020 is very different from French 100 years ago. And if you're going to go as far back as the Celts, and you're starting to talk kind of Gaelic or Gaulish kind of French, is going to be completely different yet again. So it's a case of, yes, I can understand where people from an academic point of view will kind of go, oh, well, won't there be language barriers and X, Y, and Z reasons why that isn't a good method? Whereas actually, no, we use the same common symbols as we have used throughout all of time. You know, I can imagine most people,
like Jungian psychology.
Yeah, you point to your nose and think smell, or like there are parts of that language that you would develop with that ancestral work. Yes, it would take longer because you would have to find common ground somewhere. But it's the same way as when we talk about going into a voodoo house and recognizing energy at that point. To actually get the best out of that kind of ancestral work, you're going to have to be adept enough at understanding energy field and understanding how transmutation works, or whatever particular type of magic you tend to work. There is a language within that. I know, looking at a piece of textiles, for example, that from now I understand how those two threads interact in a kind of binary code. That is the same binary code that we've used for millennia. And you can go to any period of time. Maybe the textile itself is different, but the way that they're interlaced into each other is a method. It's a craft. So therefore, there is always a common language that can be pushed further and further back. So I kind of for me, I think if you were an approach, you're not going to get the kind of storytelling levels that you necessarily want. But then there's nothing stopping somebody going through vision challenges in order to get that done, in which case they would have to live that time in a dream state in order to have to kind of view it enough times to understand. Like, I don't know. I think far too many people simplify what they're attempting to get out of it. Like, or they overcomplicated the thing that they think they need to know in order to get there. Whereas actually, like a lot of things that we teach, going through the process will learn it out. You will learn it organically. So, me going and spending time in, I don't know, a Roman period or whatever, even if I necessarily never spent any time there in a previous life, if I was to watch enough of it, there would be rhythms. Humanity has its rhythms. You would be able to figure a lot of that out. It may not be a case of going, oh, well, what is that guy's name or what's his profession in a 2-minute conversation. What you're probably going to have to do is watch him for a day and figure out how he works, what he does, what tools he uses. There are other triggers that will be kind of like, oh, okay, I now understand what this person's life is or whatever. But surely, again, what's the purpose of going back to look at these things? For a lot of people, is that just purely academic, as they want to see, as a kind of travelling moment? Or are they actually wanting to improve their practice in some way? Because those two things are very, very different. And I've gone on multiple tangents there, so drag me back to wherever you wanted me to answer.
Well, I'll just give you my take and see if you agree on the last kind of points that you made. So, if you're trying to break down the reason for doing ancestral work and working with the dead, that kind of thing, I think it varies. It shows a lot about the magician or witches or magical practitioner's path and their experience level. So I find that beginners are trying to get as much knowledge as possible and trying to experiment with as much as possible. So for the average person who doesn't, it's the average atheist, say, that's brought up in this kind of modern Western times, they would think, well, I don't believe in all this deities and stuff like that, but obviously I'm alive, I'm conscious, something has to happen with that when I die, so I will stretch to the point of believing that something living, whether it be a human or an animal, their soul or spirit lingers on in some form, and they try to explore that. I find that the next level of practitioner, once they've been doing that for a while, they then try to accumulate knowledge of what the process is. So how does death work? What is the process? Is reincarnation a thing? Is there a heaven? Is there a hell? Blah, blah, blah. And normally it's so that they have some level of control over it, because humans like to control everything. And then when they get to the stage, then we've now reached foundational magic. So everything before that is working towards starting a foundation in magic. And then when you get to the foundation point where you're starting to build a foundation, you're normally looking at, okay, can I start to interact with aspects of myself that have come before? Can I tie all of these past lives? And then people often get into future lives as well, and you can talk about multiversal theory and multiple universes and all that kind of thing. But people then try to tie those things together and to try and grow organically as a greater thing. That when you've mastered that, you then have a foundation, I would say, in magic. And then you're talking about past that intermediate forms of magic. So most of the time you'll meet people that are working on getting that foundation.
Yeah, definitely.
Or getting to the foundation course. So if you think about when you get to the stage when you're interacting with yourself both in the past and in the future from this linear time perspective, you're now in the first year of medical school.
Yeah.
You've got the foundation stage. Before that, you're in pre-med. So when you're working with ancestors and that kind of thing, and not really tying things together and not really moving as a strong cohesive unit of you as a greater being, then you're pre-med. So you haven't got onto that stage yet. So really foundational is what I find most people are trying to build towards. And there are people that with varying levels of success. I've met quite a lot of people that are of a foundational perspective, or I class them on that foundational level. I've met people that are at an intermediate level, so that's way beyond what most people are used to comprehending or think is possible as a beginner. But it depends. I think your work very much is flavored by your paradigm and what you believe is possible and what you've experienced. And I think that initial beginner pre-med kind of stage is exploration, is the exploration of wanting to see your past lives and experience and have these regressional hypnotherapy things and trying to work out what is a ghost, what's a spirit, what's this, what's that. And then once you've got a lot of answers and once you've experienced a lot, then it's normally you trying to take control of the situation, and that's where you start to see foundational magic come in, because they're actually wanting to interfere with the process, maybe change it or speed it up or slow it down, that kind of thing. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Well, that was the bit I was avoiding talking about earlier, which is the idea of, the actual considering yourself as ancestral line. And that obviously interacting with, other versions of yourself before and after your current paradigm. But mainly because I didn't want to introduce that far too quickly. I know we're in the second.
Is that what you normally would consider to be put on the Patreon?
No. I don't mean it like that. I just mean as in, I didn't know at what point you wanted us to get there. So that was.
So should we breeze over the basics first and then pick that up? Because you've joked about recently setting up an ancestral altar to yourself, so you only deal with past incarnations of yourself.
Because that's about the only version of ancestral work that actually makes any sense to me, as in terms of my personal practice. I wouldn't find, like I hinted at before, it's been a while since I've been around, so therefore there is that kind of struggle of, well, I don't feel connected to my bloodline, and I have no desire really, beyond an academic one, of looking at it. So my interactions with ancestors, quote unquote, would more likely be with the earth itself or previous versions of myself as a place to explore, to improve if possible, or remember ways in which and things I've left places, is probably the main reason for doing it.
Well, you're one of those people that blocks yourself off to a certain extent.
Yes.
Because there are doors that you keep firmly closed purposefully.
Yeah.
So, and that's the thing with ancestral work, this kind of thing, it opens up doorways for a lot of people, which they're kind of like, oh, this is a big paradigm shift here. Which is one of the reasons why I think we try to encourage it, because we joke about we don't do a lot of ancestral work and stuff like that ourselves, which, to be honest with you, we don't do a huge amount, but it is of great benefit to people, and it would be of benefit to us, I'm sure, if we'd have the time to do that kind of thing. But for us, it's very much a case of when the phone goes.
Yeah, I think for us,
we've got to deal with what's going on.
I think for us, it's a case of considering that sort of work too big a distraction from what we're actually doing here. Because we've agreed with ourselves that we must help as many as we can and be available in that way, to improve, help other people improve themselves. Whereas actually, we both agree that we're not here to necessarily improve ourselves. This is a bit of a different paradigm for us, I guess. Which then makes you kind of go, actually, however fun that would be, it's kind of not necessary. in this particular lifetime. For me, it's like reading a good book. It's kind of a little holiday away from the day-to-day slog.
Well, it doesn't matter as well. When you get to working past an intermediate stage, you're talking about the beginning and the ends of universes happening in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
So nothing that happens in this world matters. Nothing that happens in this universe matters. It all happened a very long time ago / is happening.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't get hung up on things.
Yeah.
Like, I don't really have much of a problem, because I think, well, nothing I do here really matters, because even if I destroyed the entire universe, and I'm not saying I would do that or try to do that, but even if I did, I know that it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
So, there's layers to these things, isn't it? And that's the thing. When you go past a certain layer, that's the energies in which you're dealing with. You're dealing with down here in the world. If people die and things go extinct and stuff like that, and that kind of thing, COVID, you could say, you might feel as a human, oh, this is really bad. This is really bad. But actually, if you look at it as a greater being, and you look down, you think, wait a minute, this happened. This tiny little thing happened in this world that only went and gone when I was looking in the opposite direction. In this universe that has started 5 seconds ago,
Yeah.
and is going to end in 2 minutes' time.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, it's difficult, because everyone has to think about this sort of thing and look at things from their own current magical practice, their own stage, their own paradigm, their own eyes, essentially. And it's difficult getting various people with different experiences on different paths to agree and understand each other, because a lot of the time with different paths, they're different experience, aren't they?
Yeah, and they're different for a reason. But yeah, I think it's a tricky one. Like, yes, I've been toying with the idea whether or not I actually go ahead and do it, because again, it's one of those. I only considered it as an option, really, on the fact that we're doing more and more mentorship work than I've done in a long time, and actually there are some skill sets that probably would be useful to remember.
Well, I find that that's the thing, right? When I used to work with the secret societies and doing things, my own work, and working with other people within a small group, a secret group, you just do what is efficient.
Yeah.
The problem is, when dealing with clients nowadays, is you don't do what's efficient. You do things the way they want to do.
Yeah.
So if you can see someone's, and we've gone into past lives, I think we did it on the Deja Vu again podcast, but if you're talking about progression and stuff like that and exploration, you can see exactly what the person's going to learn before they've learned it. You can't tell them what they've got to learn and that kind of thing, because they wouldn't learn it otherwise. It's an experience thing. But it is quite difficult, because of course you're thinking, like, at the moment is all the Norse stuff. So you've got, well, I remember this, that and the other, and I know that all of what you've just said is I know that film, that thing you were talking about, the Vikings, is all, and I know that the experiments that you're currently doing is going to get you to a certain level, that kind of thing. And you think, I could recommend to you an easier way of doing it, which would just cut out all of that, but you can't do that, can you? You just can't do that.
No, because they wouldn't learn anything.
That's been the biggest paradigm shift for me, is the fact that I have to use inefficient means of working. And when you're talking about the past and past magic, because again, the huge romanticized view, especially with all of these ancient aliens documentaries, is, oh well, the people of the past, these great ancient cultures, they knew far more than us about magic and stuff like that. And it's like, well, no, I remember back then, and I know this and I know that, and I watched the birth of that, and I watched the end of this as a human, as something else, that kind of thing. And it does make you think, well, there comes a point where you need to think, well, actually, all of these systems of the past, some of them are greater than the systems that are currently in place at the moment, some of them not, and Oh, we're about to go into the Patreon, so we've almost passed the watershed. So that's it for this week.